건 부족해 너는 거기가 뭔가 좀 넘쳐 I don't care 모든 말은 참 쉽지 그래 실행이 어려운 거야 Do it, move it, do it 우린 그냥 할게 내 갈 길은 멀고 그 위에는 드라마가 있어 저 외로움이 너무 길어지는다면 그 맘을 쏘아 올려
Hello, happy Saturday. I had to show you something super cute. Are you familiar with BT21? I'm assuming you are. Please tell me yes or no. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's K Talk Live. A little heavier topic, so I'm going to start with something fun, like these stickers. So, let's say hi to everybody here. Hi, Pan Pink Waving. I love it. I love it. I forgot, as I'm cleaning out my office still, not cleaning out, sorry, cleaning up my office, that I have all these gifts and, fun things like this. Isn't this cute? Do you know who these folks are? Who are these folks? I'm just waiting to answer if you know who these folks are. You don't have to name each person, but just who. Yes, I see folks saying this. Well, I'm showing this because just talking about updates here. If I have to give a latest update, potential. So this is where we've entered 2025 officially, and there could be potential, I would say, collaborations ahead, right? And this could be one of them. We'll see. Just saying, just getting all excited. These are super cute characters representing which K-pop group? Hello? Put it in the chat box. Yes. Exactly. Here we go. This is a quiz. Who's this? Put in the chat box. First one that gets the right answer, I will say yes, yay or nay. Hi, Vera. Linda's like this. I'll let someone answer. Do you guys, what K-pop group? Say who they are. Nancy, because I know you know who they are. So who's this person? I'll like count to, let me count. Yes, thank you, BTS. Who is this character? I started with this person. I'll give a hint. He was in a fun recent documentary on Disney Plus. Since we already said these are BTS members, which BTS member is this one? The other hint is his nickname is something you can eat. Yes, Joe, it's BTS, but I'm wondering if you guys know who this person is. Okay, I'll just give you a very big hint. Golden Magne. I'm just waiting. I just want to see the answers in. Everyone's like, I thought we were talking about trauma. This is about, no, I'm just kidding. I just wanted something fun. Yes, thank you, JK, Chongguk, Cookie. Aren't they cute? These are stickers that I got. So I forget that I get a lot of, in Korea, I have a lot of meetings and a lot of fun things, and I get fun gifts like this that are stickers for potential tour collabs. Stay tuned. So here's the first one, and you got it correct. Thank you, Nancy. Who's this person? Dun, dun, dun. As you can see, it says Tata. Dun, dun, dun. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, what's a big hint? It's a big, huge hint. Ginny's Kitchen. Ginny's Kitchen. That I just gave it away. Who was the BTS member on Ginny's Kitchen? Sometimes I'm like, I don't like these YouTube delays because I'm like, hello, because I know you guys know this person. It is, thank you, Nancy. It's okay if you get it all right. It's all good because I know you know them. Yes, V. Okay, let's put this down. Okay, let's do this one. This is so cute. Who's this person? Dun, 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 dun. Also, okay, what's a good hint? I have a big hint, but now I'm like, just say it. D-Day. Dun, 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 dun. D-Day, D-Day, D-Day. D-Day is coming soon for these folks who are going to be released from Kunde, the military, in June. But who is this person? The nickname being, I'm just going to give it away, Shuki. That's pretty easy. Yeah, Shuki, and it is Suga. just because I'm like, oh, I have a lot to talk about. But these are super cute stickers. I would love to put them on my laptop, but no, it's not like I don't want to, but I don't know. As a corporate speaker, they might be like, what's with all the stickers? Okay, who's this? Dun, 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 dun. Yes, that was Sugar. Shiki is Sugar. Now we're on this one. A big hint. His dad's cafe is on my tour. That's all I'm going to say. Yeah, that's pretty easy who this person is. And then who's this? So these are cute. They have their own characters, right? The nickname is, I'm just going to say the nickname is Chimmy, but who does that sound like? So I feel like that's a pretty big hint as people are thinking. Good morning from LA. Yes, Chimin. Thank you, Vera. Mary, if you're joining, for folks who are joining who are like, what is Jeannie talking about? She has these stickers. Just wanted to do something fun. I forgot as I was cleaning up my office that I got some gifts from BT21 Line Friends for potential tour collabs. It's kind of crazy, all these things. And I was just showing off the stickers I got. And maybe some of you will get these. Yes, this is Chimin. Chimmy. Dun, 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 dun. Who's this? This one's the biggest sticker. This is the group. And we already know it's BTS. Who is this? Okay, what's a big hint? He is not in the military anymore. Just like two people they can think about. Dun, 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 dun. And then I think I have one more person left. Hold on, let me make sure I did. I think I did. Oh no, I have a lot more people. You guys are, okay, so I'll just say who these are and then who's this. I'm going to kind of go through quickly because I realize we are short on time and everyone's like, what are these people? So this one is Koya. That's RM. Do you guys know this one? Am I down left to two? Let's see. I did this one. This one. Yeah. Who's this? Can you guys get this one? He's currently out of the, well, this one is J-Hope, Jin, Mung, RJ. Yay! Oh, is that your fave, Koya? Here. So I'm going to show you. I got this gift from some of my Seattle folks. Okay, so listen, as people say, there is no age limit to fangirling, including the folks that we watch on screen, to the Korean dramas, to the Korean movies, film, to K-pop groups, to artists, whoever they are, you can fangirl or fanboy. And so even getting stickers, because I saw these, I went, look, I forgot I had these stickers. And I had to test if they were stickers because they look so pretty. I thought maybe this was a mouse pad, but it's a sticker. And so that's why I'm starting off, because we're going to be talking about trauma. But I thought, let me just show you these cute characters as you visualize all these, as we talk about more of a serious topic, but also have fun discussing them through the eyes of our K-drama. So I have these at my desk, and hopefully some of you guys on my tours this year will see some of these in real life. Yay! Okay, what did I just say, Mandy, that said thank you for saying that? Because I don't. Oh, the fangirl? Yeah. Now I'm like, maybe because I do this for a living, I don't care if you make fun of me or they stare at me. I get weird stares all the time. People just assume because, like, I say it on social media and I do it in real life. No, in a room full of executives or even teenagers or even young adults will stare at me like this. When I'm like, yeah, you can learn a lot from Korean dramas and you can learn a lot from artists, K-pop artists, or some of your favorite artists. And they'll just be like, right. But because I'm pretty now, I would say an expert at sharing how much you can learn from these folks, mental health wise, life takeaways, life lessons, no one can argue with me. Plus, then I'll just go to you guys and you guys can like be there for me. So yeah, I still get weird looks and I get looks like we thought you were a clinician. And no, I still get that. I still get it even from my friend group or, again, I get the same thing as you guys. Sometimes worse because they're like, so you wrote a book on K-dramas? Because I talked about it recently. I'm like, yeah, I talked about K-dramas and mental health. They're like, oh, those looks like, oh, interesting. And now I'm like, oh, I saw that look. Now I just call them out going, what do you mean by that look? Because I am a mental health expert and I just combined stories that I see really help. I'm trying to put this back in a sticker packet. Anyways, okay, well, welcome. The other update I have is I'm totally sleep deprived because I did go out with friends last night, but then I'm kind of more on Asia time, you know, because this is now a month. No, wait a second. I leave for Korea in like 2.5, 3 weeks or something. And so I have to, there's a lot that I'm trying to get done before, because once I go, it really is hitting the ground running. Do you know when you're in Korea? Of course, you guys are trying to take advantage of it, being in Korea when you're there, of all the sights to see, but also working there. It's like supersonic speed. So I think I land, have 24 hours to rest. No, not even 12 hours to rest. And then I get into a conference for like the next 4 days. So that's exciting. I get to speak at a women's conference and it's going to be fun. But then I hit the ground running with lots of planning. And the exciting thing of the update that I have is our tours. We have settled on our Jeju itinerary. I want to say officially, and then we added one new K-drama, which I haven't even seen yet, but it's the IU K-drama. If you're going to talk about when life gives you tangerines and you see Jeju Island in the background, yeah, you're of course going to add it, because I already feel good about that drama, and that'll be airing when we're in Jeju as we speak. So that complicated things a little bit, but it's all set. And then we have changed several days of our main itinerary. So you'll see that if you've been on my tours, I like to talk about it, not to give you FOMO, but just proud of different things that pop up that make sense. When it comes to mental health, it's almost like I want to tie the two together. Your mental health is always changing. It's not like you're constantly happy and I hope not constantly stressed. So it's like, hey, we will change this up on day one because it makes sense. And what some of the exhibits, kind of hinted, exhibits that are on during the spring happen during my spring tour. So I will, of course, take advantage of that. So that said, that's the biggest update. I thought I had another update. I think that was it. And then, so let's move on to some of your questions. Yeah, fangirling, just start making fun of people who watch. No, okay, shouldn't make fun of people. But I'll always reference people who watch like American football. You know, it's the same concept, and admiring their sports people, same concept, same emotional, feeling when you have these hormones that align, the happy hormones, same thing. So I always say that. I go, oh, no, so don't you watch like football, the NFL season, like Super Bowl's like in 2 weeks? Okay, I'm assuming you watch hours of football, same thing. And then they're like, good point. So just give them those examples. Yeah, IU drama. Yes, while we're in Jeju. Isn't that cool? Now, you do know that in Korea, there's no subtitles on the TVs. So people do watch them. They're like, Jeannie, I saw the show. I saw the scenes, but there's no subtitles. So you can also watch it on your Netflix or Viki. Oh, actually, Viki doesn't work in Korea. So you'd have to use a VPN. You guys have all learned that when you're on my tour. But also, you're so tired, you're not really watching K-dramas when you're on my tour. Okay, let's move on to Q&A. So there were 3 good questions, because I have a lot to talk about with PTSD and all that. Why are some mothers in K-dramas shown as incredibly toxic to their daughter's kids? And so obviously this person had a specific one in mind. Yeah, they're also incredibly toxic to their sons and their kids. It's hard to answer as in why necessarily the writer writes that. And toxic, I'm giving you my multi-layered answer. Toxic is not exactly how I would always describe the situation, because it may look toxic, but it's very like cultural. That does not mean it's good. And actually it can be bad, but also it's also part of the culture. Does that make sense? So lately, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm seeing a lot of that. So I saw this and I have to answer this question, because I was like, there is a lot, and it's actually kind of triggering. So just like you guys, I will stop a drama. Like I'll pause it and actually even look a little like annoyed, because I'm like, oh, this is supposed to be my self-care, but my heart rate's increasing. Kind of know what's going on with you, because I'm agitated and I don't want to keep being agitated. So I'm not going to watch. So people are watching, not Motel California. I think Motel California people are liking that. I didn't start that one because I'm not in the mood to right now. Not because it's not good. It's just what my mood is. So certain things, it's so important to know. Again, I'm assuming also you enjoy watching K-dramas, but if you feel that like weirdness or whatever, or like you're skeptical, like When the Stars Gossip, I'll more on that in a second, then you don't need to watch. But I'm seeing, because of the single moms or the moms, really upsetting. And what is that drama that's about the K-pop person? I'm drawing a blank. I started it and it triggered me, because I was like, oh my goodness, am I seeing another one where the mom is just, in all honesty, horrible? I just think it's a storytelling trope at this time. And maybe the writers, because I didn't talk to the writer, but the writer writing it. It could be based on their own personal experiences or just what they see. I'm going to tell you what I see. I don't necessarily see that in Korea. If anything, I see kind of the opposite, where they're so involved in a very loving way that's not also healthy, but I don't see that like, get away from me, I'm abandoning you. And so I think that's more of a trope, and it might have been something in the past. But I do see there is a stigma to single motherhood and single fatherhood. You don't see as many single fathers. I was trying to think of personal experiences, people that I know, but I think that also exists everywhere else. Not so much stigma might be the wrong word. A little bit of like sensitivity, you know? And it's definitely different if you're a widow. Oh, yes. Is it Namib? Okay, yes. Famous. I love the lead guy and I love the lead actress. She was in a famous K-drama that I fell in love with. She's also in Dear My Friends, but Sandglass. And no, I think I made it through almost early episode 3 because I was fascinated with how they're showing the K-pop industry, and I just stopped. And so it was triggering me. Like I actually literally at one point was like, oh my gosh, am I having like my heart rate was like this? Maybe because I hear about it a lot. And then I saw the scene with the mom and even their own marriage and all this stuff. So obviously I'm sure it's going to end well, but I just stopped. So that is the drama. And if you're finding it difficult, then there's reasons. By the way, if you're finding something difficult, it's relatable. It may be reminding you of an incident, bringing back some memories that you're not quite sure where it's from. It's kind of like that. There's so much going on in Korea with the K-pop industry. That was, I think, was my trigger. I'm like, oh my gosh, I hear about this all the time, or you're seeing this in the news, which is triggering part of the trauma that I want to talk about. I stopped. No, it wasn't Doona. I did finish Doona, and I thought Doona was actually pretty good. So, yeah, love Scout. And so on that note, but don't you think it's interesting? I love seeing these days single dads that are making headway and wonderful stories. So I was trying to analyze that too, going, what's going on here? Seeing some toxic moms. It's because this question made me think. You're seeing it, but I am going to be honest, I don't think it's necessarily reflective of real life. So if anything, maybe it's the opposite. You know, you're actually seeing the moms very much involved compared to some of the dads. It's still like that. It's a very patriarchal society still, right? And so I had to answer that. So I can't really answer why, but that to me is a trope that I'm seeing that kind of bothers me. Actually, I'm kind of like, why are we seeing these mothers so like not nice? They do exist. Trust me. You know, I've worked with folks like that, but it's not necessarily like the majority. Yeah, Juno was hard though, but it had some realistic examples. So I did finish that one. Okay, let's move on to the next question, because I have so much to go through. Oh my gosh, Singles Inferno. Who's watching Singles Inferno? Say yes or no. Episode 4, someone talked about the differences about Gen Zs. Okay, so Singles Inferno, I started and then I stopped because I got there's so much to watch right now and I just don't have all this time. So I stopped watching it. And the best part about all these Singles Inferno, honestly, is watching the panelists, watching their whole like commentary. And so this came up, and I do know this. It came up about the differences of how Gen Zs communicate with one another, and also Dex, who's one of the commentators, he's very young compared to the other folks. So you see a difference there, even though I think he's meshing really well. He's actually super good. So there is a Gen Z communication difference. First of all, I have 4 kids who are Gen Zs. I know that. And how they communicate versus millennials, Gen Xers, and then baby boomers and up is very different. And the reason why I wanted to answer this question is because we have to be cognizant of those communication differences. As a Gen X who's like, how, you know, don't tell me how to communicate, right? Or like if you're a parent, you're like, yeah, you need to get better with communicating when you're talking to your kids. But it's also important to understand, especially Gen Zs, they grew up only knowing social media. They were the first generation to be 100% in the digital era. We remember when Facebook was created, or one of those, and emails, I think it was 1996 or 1995 when email came out. I remember this. So all of this is really important. Oh, Idahi is awesome. Yeah. And she's also so glamorous, right? That's from Singles Inferno. I think it's really, oh, are you talking about the person or the commentator? Because I think that's her name too. So I think it's really important to know that the way they communicate is they like things up front. And so Gen Xers, baby boomers, we can call on the phone and say things. They will prefer the upfront things on texts. And so I think that's kind of what came up. And we need to understand that, because if you're in the workplace, you will work with different people. And they're also very, I would say, maybe more social justice oriented. They believe in mental health days, or they believe in making sure that they follow their passions. Nothing is good or bad. People will say things like, okay, Gen Z, they'll quit. But they also have good boundaries. So I'm talking about Gen Zs. They'll be like, yeah, this isn't doing it for me. This is, you're infringing on my space. I actually had some people tell me that. I was like they said something like, so I don't answer texts outside of Monday through Friday. And I went, okay, but you kind of work for me. I mean, I'm just, I went, I would never say that to a boss. But I had to just reframe things for a second and go, okay, that's good boundaries. And technically, yeah, it'd be nice not to text somebody on a Saturday. But then I also had to give my 2 cents of how different things are. And maybe, yeah, you could respond by saying, hey, maybe I won't do this now, but I'll do it later. But don't ghost people. By the way, that's ghosting. They're all into ghosting. And so I wanted to bring that up, that we have to understand the differences and understand how those differences impact your mental health. We, as if you're in the midlife, very different. And again, nothing's good or bad. I wish I could say, yeah, it sucks that they do this. Sometimes I say it. I'm like, oh my goodness, did you ghost somebody? You don't text them, respond. I get so annoyed. But then I have to understand this is how they communicate, and we communicate differently. We also see work differently. We sometimes overwork. I say we because I'm talking about my age. So my age and up, we tend to overwork. Yeah, we'll be like, oh my goodness, if a boss said to do something, I would do it 100,000%. That's not necessarily good either. It's a great quality work ethic. But if you can't have that balance, and you guys, our age is leading the workplace, we're in trouble. And that's why the Gen Zs go, yeah, we see those unhealthy leaders and we don't want to be that. So that's all part of communication. And I love talking about it, because the workplace is all filled with those, the age group of Gen Z. So let's say they graduate from college 22, average age US, and up. Then you have 22 to 30, that critical age of where this young generation, you need them to do their job too. So if you want to have them do their job, then you also have to meet them kind of where they're at, but they also have to meet you where they're at. So it's always on both ends. But I don't like when I hear, oh, this young population, they're so not resilient. I don't think so. First of all, they lived through a pandemic. When I think about my son, who's 22, graduated from college this year, started his college career, ended his high school career with the pandemic. So they actually are very resilient. They just are very upfront and say, by the way, I don't feel good. I'm anxious. I'm depressed. I think I have PTSD. They're just very open. And so our generation is like, oh my gosh, why are you not resilient? We actually held things in, right? We're like, we're not supposed to talk about that. Oh, we're not supposed to talk about, did you just say mental health, mental illness? People still say that going. I see flinches still when I go, hey, let's talk about trauma. And then you see flinches online, you see it in person, but I'm used to that. So I'm like, yeah. And you just call it out going, yeah, it's uncomfortable. Who wants to talk about trauma? But it does exist. COVID was seen as traumatic. In my field, it was traumatic. You have a lot of things that happen. So I am talking about all these differences. And when I hear people saying, oh, midlife people, oh, you Gen Xers, oh my gosh. Actually, someone, funnily enough, who's a millennial, who's a colleague of mine, not in therapy, in business, was like, yeah, you're such a boomer. And I went, what? And he's like, you don't know about, I think he was talking about Snapchat. And I do know Snapchat because my kids are on it and I have an account, but I'm not on it. But he said something and I at first was jokingly offended. And then I thought about it going, he's so right. He called me out because I was totally like, okay, Snapchat, like really? And then I went, wait a second, you're right. That he goes, millennials and Gen Zs, that's how they communicate. At a snap of a hat, take a photo. And by the way, that photo disappears. I think is it like Instagram slides, like 24 hours, something like that. It disappears. But that's how they will show a picture of someone cooking and it's on Snapchat. That's their communication. It's very instant. It's very instant. So when he called me out, I went, oh yeah, I guess I'm a boomer. You're right. I just looked down on that. And he saw that. So I thought that was a moment that I had, like, I think it was actually last summer or something at a conference. And I went, don't call me boomer because I'm not a boomer. But it was his way of saying you need to like get a little bit more of an understanding on Snapchat or how people communicate. I'm going to pause and say hello to everybody. Panel actress, yes. The panel is always the best. I mean, I just love watching the panel and their reactions, right? When they're like, oh my gosh, did that just happen? This generation also watched their parents commit 100% and heaven not matter in the end. Yes. I mean, there's this great corporate guy that I love, and he will say things like, at what cost is your hard work? Right. And now I ask that question to clients going, at what cost? I love that you got promoted. Now you're chief executive officer or chief financial officer. That is awesome. But at what cost when they're coming to me and talking about things? And I'm not judging. That is not a judging answer. It's more like, what cost is it to your mental health, to your family's mental health? I constantly have to ask myself. In fact, hubby will say, at what cost? Because we know, and I'm like, you're right. What cost? Well, it's costing my mental health. This is some of my own experiences and decisions I had to make. Hello from Minnesota. I won't complain about what the weather here. It's cold here, but Minnesota's colder. So that's my answer to that. So at the end, what I'm trying to tell you, if you just joined, you have to understand Gen Z, millennial, Gen Xers, baby boomers, form of communication and how it impacts their well-being. Those are the people in the workplace. Gen Alpha is now coming up, but they're young. They're not in the workplace yet. So that was the question to that, because they noticed that on Singles Inferno. By the way, if you know, people think it's Singles Inferno, it's all dating show. That's only maybe half of it. You're seeing all these people. It really is also the panelists interacting and how they differ on opinions and what they're seeing between these relationships. It's fascinating. So I do recommend it. So I've seen 1 to 3. I'm behind on 4. Okay, let's go to the next one. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, how can you help someone with PTSD? So, first of all, the easy answer to that is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is one of the most difficult, and it's mental illness because it's a diagnosis, one of the most difficult things to deal with. And I'm saying this as a therapist. So, at the very end of the day, helping them also may mean, number one, suggesting they seek professional help. Someone who is trained. And even me, when I have to recommend clients or people that come to me and I can't take them, or they just come from a recommendation from another state, because you have to be licensed in that state, I look carefully and research to see folks who are trained specifically in post-traumatic stress disorder, trauma, and the therapy models they use. Why? Because it is very tricky. It's tricky because of symptoms you have to look out for. It's a consistent need for professional guidance on how to manage symptoms that can be pretty bad. So helping someone, number one, can be suggesting the best way possible for them to seek professional help. You can also help them do that. Like I tell people, don't be the therapist. I'm going to repeat, don't be the therapist. Even I have had to boundaries with friends when I'm like, you're coming to me as a therapist, but I'm your friend. So I'm going to first be your friend and tell you what I think. And then I'll give you the therapist recommendation. I'll always say, I need to refer you. You need to go to this person. But if you're not trained in it, and even therapists who struggle, I don't want you to be the therapist. And I see it all the time. It can backfire on you. If you feel like, okay, I can help them. Like I can take them to places. I could do whatever. Just have the boundary, because it also can be traumatizing for you to be in that position. And I've seen relationships get very conflicted because you played a little bit about that therapist. It's great. You're being helpful. You're trying to be helpful, but in the end, it may not be helpful. So that's the first thing. Suggest that when you know they're dealing with PTSD, and maybe you know the incident that happened or the distressing event. The California fires are a very specific example recently that are pretty triggering. And even if you weren't firsthand getting some experience, there's other traumas involved. So that's one. And then two, how can you help someone with PTSD? Well, if it's a family member, I suggest books. You can read books on it. Just don't read the clinical ones. Like I thought I had one. It's somewhere in my office, like, a clinical for like a therapist to read. I don't suggest those, but there's lots of different ones of like how to parent your child with PTSD. You could Google that. There's one by, I do love Dr. Dan Siegel. He is a clinician. He's a neuroscientist, and he's written some books for parenting of kids who have PTSD, who have trauma, if you're a parent. So that's another, like if you're a family member, you can also read those books. But again, stray away from the clinical ones because you're not a therapist, but the ones that'll say things like, have good boundaries. Number 3, besides reading up on things, number 3, boundaries. you can help someone with PTSD, but you have to make sure you have good boundaries in doing that. Meaning, it's not like you could be there at 3 a.m., right? It's a family member and that's difficult, but you're not any good to somebody if it starts really impacting your own well-being, which actually is the first thing to decline. Do you know, side note, caretakers end up getting sicker first before the patient? The patient's already ill. We know that. But the caretakers, because they neglect themselves, you see it in the K dramas, right? Then they end up getting sicker and like sometimes they end up going first, if that makes sense. I just kind of went to a dark place, but that's an example of someone who has PTSD. If you're trying so hard to help and then you kind of neglect all the things that going with you, and then you also traumatize yourself, and then you traumatize, you're traumatized, you could re-traumatize the patient, the family member. Boundaries are like one of the top things. I think I'm on number 4 of how you need to make sure you have those in place. It could be even being like, you know what? Blank, blank, you're my friend, you're my family member, but I also think I'm your mom, I'm your dad, but I also need you to get this professional help. And I'm also going to help you along the way. You could even be part of the therapy process. I'm a family therapist. So I could have like I think the most people I had was 7 people in a therapy session because they're family members or friends that can help. So again, that's a tricky question, but I would go to the number 1. They also need professional help. It's a little bit out of your wheelhouse. And therapists will even say that. Some therapists are specifically trained to deal with PTSD. I'm going to go ahead now because it kind of aligns with the K-dramas that show post-traumatic stress. This is actually in my book too. There is a difference between post-traumatic stress and being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. So first things first, if there is a traumatic event you experienced immediately, California fires, there's events in Korea that happened, plane crash, all that stuff, and it's directly impacted you, you need to immediately do something, meaning talk to somebody, know that you're going through that, because after about a month or so, it's according to our diagnostic manual, if it's not resolved or you're just kind of in that survival mode, then we could diagnose you with PTSD. But do you know that it doesn't have to be PTSD? Just because you saw trauma, you can actually, this is tricky. It could still be very horrific. But that doesn't mean you immediately go, oh yeah, you have PTSD. In fact, sometimes it's overused. When I hear it, I'm like, okay, maybe that's what they're acting like. I'm being sarcastic. I'm like, just because this happened, don't say PTSD, because that is a specific diagnosis and a very severe diagnosis, because you have to treat that very well and maybe for the rest of your life. But by the way, I love this. There are many people I see who will tell me they were diagnosed with PTSD. I didn't diagnose them. They had it, but I see them for something else. And I've shared that with you. People can live very well, just like you can live very well having a physical illness diagnosis. What's the most common one? Heart disease, cholesterol, diabetes, type 1 or 2. If you manage it well, it doesn't become a hindrance. It just becomes a part of your life, but you have to watch it. Post-traumatic stress disorder, mental illness is the same way or same thing. So it's really important to know that. So post-traumatic stress, the minute there's an incident, like people like me are like, we need to immediately have crisis intervention, or people who are like, I am not a crisis intervention person because I'm not on the scene, but there are people who fly in to do that, and they're trained for that. And I could do that locally, but because I'm a trauma and grief expert, but yeah, you need to be literally immediately after. I'll give an example. Schools, when they have a school shooting, they will send crisis intervention people there to talk to the students. That's excellent. They're still going to have some trauma effects, but as long as you're talking about it, going, yeah, I saw this, I heard this, it was awful, it's preventative, and it doesn't have to immediately go to PTSD. Now, when we're on PTSD, okay, so these are the K-dramas. Let me look at them. Yes, Just Between Lovers, Rain or Shine, with Junal, one of my favorites. It's Okay to Not Be Okay. Chocolate, The Glory. There's other examples we'll talk about, but let me just outline some of the symptoms. It really, really does impact your day-to-day post-traumatic stress disorder if you're not managing it well. So I say that one of the first signs after like about a month or so, if you had the consistent symptoms of, you see this in, who saw Just Between Lovers, by the way? I feel like I'm talking and I want to get some engagement. Who saw Rain or Shine? That's with Chuno. It's Okay to Not Be Okay. Chocolate, The Glory. Listed if you've seen those 4. but they show specific examples of their symptoms that I thought was really good. And Just Between Lovers, you saw him um, substance using. That doesn't mean he was totally abusing it, but he needed some substances to get him through his symptoms. He had physical pain left over from the childhood trauma of the mall collapse. And a lot of these post-traumatic stress disorder has to do with events like natural disasters, war, but doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be. It could be a car accident. It could be the death, a death. A death can be very traumatic if you saw a very horrific way of dying. Does that make sense? So it's okay to not be okay. Chocolate, Just Between Lovers, and The Glory all reflect childhood trauma that led up to them experiencing these PTSD symptoms. So that is why it's really important, kids, families, experiences, and treating it. And I always feel like people go, oh, you have PTSD. Oh my goodness, you can't. No. I need people to know that there are people around you that have experienced trauma. So I come from the lens of a trauma-informed lens. That means that everybody in our life has experienced some sort of trauma. That's the perspective. And that is actually a very, I want to say, growing perspective for many folks, not just clinicians, because we see it. So I think it's really important to know that there's some sort of trauma in ours. I'll give you an example of immigrants, people who moved from Korea or China or wherever and moved to the US. Traumatic. I'm talking about leaving your home country. That's an example. So when I say trauma, it doesn't have to be so like a natural disaster. It can be many different forms. Let me see this. You saw It's Okay. So Rain or Shine, a Chocolate. They're among my Just Between Lovers and Chocolate. Actually saw them except The Glory. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Let me preface that. You don't need to see The Glory. You actually don't need to see any of these. Chocolate, I rewatched with my husband because he was watching it. And the whole time he's like, this is so depressing. And I was like, it wasn't depressing the first time. It was more depressing the second time. So I might have watched it the first time when, I don't know, it wasn't triggering. I watched it. It was beautifully done. Beautifully done. But definitely I was like, yeah, this is depressing. Because we watched it like a week ago. We just finished. But he loved it. It's a good, you could still watch something and it's kind of hard to watch, but beautifully done and poignant, as long as it's not getting you these like physical sensations where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm totally triggered. The Glory, yes, difficult watch. I think I closed my eyes like this, especially through episode 1 and 2, but I still watched it, and it shows very vividly horrific things, and then kind of skips her whole life until adulthood, and we see that. So the symptoms are very physical, like sweating. You literally look like you're having an anxiety attack. You can't breathe. There could be physical pain that comes up. You can't sleep. You're on medication / substances to help you because you want to like not feel that. So you're just like, oh my goodness, I don't want to feel it. So let me just numb myself. You've seen it. All of those are totally there in these dramas. Chocolate showed it a little bit more subtly, but they would talk about it, going, oh yeah, when I was trapped. They also showed the mall collapse. So there was a very big incident in Korea where literally, as you see from these K-dramas, Rain or Shine, Chocolate, there's a couple others that were based on that mall collapse where people literally were in the building and the mall collapsed, right? So that is where they're getting these incidents. So it's legit. People to this day who struggle with that. But you see them having flashbacks. That's the most common thing. That's great. That's actually what K-dramas do the best, showing you visually someone remembering the trauma or someone remembering the moment, and actually you feel it. That's when you're like, oh my God, this is terrible. Someone cried every episode of Chocolate. Yeah, this time around, you see how we go like this? He's like, this is so depressing. And then he would keep watching, which I think is interesting. Depressing, but that doesn't mean, by the way, you can watch something depressing and not feel depressed. So that's what it was for him. Find years ago, people suffer from PTSD in some form, but it wasn't addressed, but repressed. Yeah. I'm going to actually, let me just show this one. PTSD, I saw in some folks come back during the pandemic, when the pandemic happened. There was a lot of things happening, especially of communities of color, like the Asian hate. And it's sensitive to bring up because it was a hard time, but that was a lot of my work. But folks would say, oh my goodness, this most recent thing that happened in the news reminded me when I was like 10, and I would just be like listening, but also in awe that those symptoms came back. So yes, if it's repressed or suppressed and not resolved, which a lot of folks our age and up kind of got through, because back in the day we didn't talk about it, not just in Asia, in the US. And so as it's more talked about, normalized of life, if you saw and experienced this traumatic incident that happened to you, yeah, it's awful. So I actually say that a lot. I'm like that. I actually say things like that is terrible. That's horrific. It's not to dramatize it, but just to understand and have people realize, yeah, you know what? That was traumatic. It was awful. Especially if I really believe it's awful, I'll say it. So there is a lot of that that's happening. Also, education-wise, people don't know. You don't know. Do you know that a lot of us tend to underestimate things? We're like, oh, I've been through worse, or people have been through worse. I see that a lot too. That may be true, right? But don't minimize your own experiences. Don't also go, oh my gosh, look at me. But just there is a way of saying, I do see it more often. People minimize things. But I don't, it's okay. That this is worse. Look at the California fires. I go, you're right. It is terrible to experience a fire and your house burning down. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about you, because part of your healing is to acknowledge your own experiences, to acknowledge and accept that this happened to you. Does that make sense? So I think that's a lot of what the K-drama is going to do. I'm gonna now take off this comment, but I really like that. Chocolate took place in a hospice. Yeah, so that's hard, especially showing end of life. And thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that I know, their first K-dramas were chocolate, and it really therapeutically got a lot out for them because they were in that season of life. And you don't have to be in that season of life. Like technically, we're not, me and hubby, but it triggers us different ways with a parent or a mom or a marriage or a child, right? So there's little different things that'll kind of hit you. Someone said it was depressing the first time. Watched it a second time looking at it as a mother of a hospice nurse. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And I don't know what Cindy meant by atypical. Would love for you to share. Oh, atypical family. Yes, I forgot about atypical family. See, there's so many dramas. That's a great one. I loved that one from last year. And yeah, he had his own, I want to say that was a lot more grief oriented, but that's why grief and trauma can sometimes go hand in hand, because there's still some things I still remember, even about a death of a cat. I think I shared that with you. I shared that because it shifted my whole work as a therapist. I think it made me a better therapist because I understood it, because I was right there. And it was our beloved cat, but I think personally how a cat grabs onto you, that cat adored me. And so to this day, I go, I remember that moment when you see that passing. It's traumatic. Kim sharing, I took care of both my parents at home who passed with hospice care. It was a graceful experience, but so worth it. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, we have different experiences and different things hitting us. And I love that I got to rewatch Chocolate and realize a lot of you guys were impacted by Chocolate. I don't know when I first saw it. Maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago. It's Okay to Not Be Okay is another example. Okay, childhood trauma. And it pops up as adulthood. Yes, it does. So I want to say, just like grief, you're a different person post-grief. That does not mean it defines you, but it might kind of have a new you. Like you went through this grief experience. This is a new you. And I think that's important to understand. So this post-traumatic stress disorder that you might have been diagnosed with, that doesn't mean it's a lifelong diagnosis for some. Some, yes. But you can come back and be like, hey, in fact, I think I did it with a few clients. Oh, you know what? I'm going to downgrade you. That's actually what we say. I'm going to downgrade your diagnosis. I don't always share diagnoses, but I think for those that have PTSD, we're able to say, we're going to downgrade you. And now it's more like a stress disorder. It's not PTSD, or it's like adjustment. There's a lot of different things if I'm talking clinically, but that's important to understand that your symptoms can diminish over time and you're better. But it's also important to know that you heard my post the other day, mental health hygiene. I say it a lot. I'm like, oh, what's your mental health hygiene? I love how people are like, I'm like, doesn't have to be so deep. It doesn't mean you have to meditate for an hour. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how do you take care of your mental health every day? We take care of our physical health. Yes, we do. So mental health also can include, I walk every day and I listen to my favorite music. It's exercise, physical, but it's also mental. I'm just looking for simple things like that. And so when you have something like PTSD, you can live well, but you must manage it. Go to the next Yes, business proposal. I really like that he had an anxiety attack in the car. Yes, that can happen. In fact, I know some people who still struggle with that day to day. So for the business proposal lead, I'm trying a blank on the CEO lead. On Hyosup is the actor. You don't need to know the name. You saw him when it's raining. He has his own trauma from just an experience he had from his past with his parents. I thought it was well done. I mean, it was actually when you see it, you're like, but that's kind of what it looks like. Um, there are some people who know they're having an anxiety attack and can kind of manage their way through it. It doesn't have to be dramatic. If you feel like you've had one, don't think there's something wrong with you. It can happen because you witnessed something. You almost got in a car accident. You were in a car accident. You're fine, but you're like every time you drive, that hypervigilance. Oh my goodness, let me talk about the symptoms. Hypervigilance is a very common one. You're totally bracing yourself for something to go wrong or looking out for something. When you're driving and something happened, you feel like something could, rear end you any second because you remember that happening. Yeah, those are all part of your what's happened to you, but you want to manage that. You can't, it's so difficult and very tiring if you're constantly like, I'm driving. And during COVID, when I know a lot of people who were attacked, on the streets, you heard that in the news. That's legit. Those were some folks I was working with. They were constantly like, I feel like someone's behind me. And then I'd be like, well, if you feel like someone's behind you, what I want you to do. You can never just keep walking. Then there is that fear. You actually need to look at your fear, like look around and go, oh, there is nobody there. It was just a wind. So hypervigilance is also acknowledging going, okay, this happened to me, but nobody is behind me. I see that. So it's just like talking your way through it, but at least knowing that that is part of a reaction where you just feel like you could get into another accident. I don't want it to stop your life, but it's also understandable, if that makes sense, right? Oh yeah, beautiful OST for Chicago, chocolate. Nancy and hometown cha. Okay. Yes, and I didn't bring that up maybe because I didn't see specific symptoms. His was more grief, but business proposal showed literally an anxiety attack. What's wrong with Secretary Kim? You saw flashbacks. I brought that up because someone brought that up in one of my calls or something, and I went, oh my goodness, I forgot about what's wrong with Secretary Kim. There are some good ones. Yeah, on Hyosop. And then Squid Game. I did a video on Squid Game character because I disagreed with some of the comments going, oh, he lied about being in the Marines. Hello, if he said he was in the Marines. So you're in the Marines, you're in the military. You do, even if you don't see combat, you train for combat. I mean, I don't know about you, but having to do all that training can be very, very traumatic, especially if you had no experience with that. And then I didn't like seeing his symptoms, but I liked that he showed there was a whole scene. By the way, you don't have to see Squid Game. I liked Squid Game 2, by the way, better than Squid Game 1. I went against the grain. People were like, oh my gosh, Squid Game 2. I liked it so much better. I was able to watch it, but he's closing his ears. He's crouched in a corner. All of that is literally trauma happening as we speak. Like he's literally experienced PTSD. So I had to outline it. And I thought that's what he's doing. He said he was in the Marines. Maybe something happened. That could be his next story in Squid Game 3. But the minute he started hearing those guns, you saw it happening. He was nervous holding those guns. He was nervous early on before anything happened. First of all, who wouldn't be nervous if you're in like a death game? But that's me being sarcastic. But it showed really well. So that's why I did a whole thing on it, because I thought, no, I really think that's what's happening, Dan Harris, 10% happier, had a major anxiety attack on primetime news. It's hard to watch, but so inspired to see what he's done with it. I did not know that. It's more common than not. I was actually going to say one thing though. Here's the other side of it. Just because you had an anxiety attack or have them frequently, it's also good to understand that there is a difference between it being a full-blown anxiety attack or you feeling stress. Because believe it or not, I talk to some people and they'll describe it. I go, okay, I'm not diminishing what you experienced, but that is actually not an anxiety attack. You will know if it's an anxiety or panic attack, as in it's full-blown physical reaction. But there are times when you feel a little stressed. Like I told you, I was watching a K-drama, my heart rate's like this. I'm like, okay, I mean, that's not a panic attack, but my heart rate's getting there. But that is just high anxiety. And some people misinterpret that. The reason why I'm talking about this with you is because anxiety can be normal in certain situations. In fact, it's a normal part of life. I said that, right? Stress is a normal part of life. That's why I sometimes say I want to caution what we see. It's not one way or the highway. It could be, that is definitely an anxiety attack. that's more like you were just had a really bad stress reaction from something you heard, something you watched, which I'm going to talk about in a second. What you watch matters. I really felt for Kang Han-ho's character on Squid Game. My nose itchy. Will be interesting what happens next. I know everyone's like, are you seeing the controversy behind his character? I'm like, actually, no. I just thought it was PTSD. And after I did the reel, I went, oh my gosh, there's so much controversy. But no, that is what I believe it is. Now we'll find out in Squid Game 3 if he was pretending or whatever people say, but that's what it looks like. And then he couldn't even continue. He could just go in a corner. And then in that moment, he thought a lot of people were after him. Do you remember that in that section? Okay, so that's PTSD. I'm trying to think what else. Oh, another symptom is, I'm going to finalize this, emotional numbness. You just feel so numb, you don't feel anything. And actually, I want to say that's a fairly common reaction. That's not bad. That is your trauma reaction. It's a protective factor. However, this is what I say. You cannot stay numb. In fact, I'll say, we need to work on that numbness that is protecting you because you've been through so much. And now you're like, I feel nothing. I don't want you to feel nothing. You also want to feel the good emotions like happy and even sad. I need you to feel. So when I actually see those reactions of like, yeah, here we go again, another thing that happened in the news, that worries me. Because when you don't feel anything, that's kind of what we saw in Squid Game. You are just there for you need to get the money. You start feeling nothing about deaths. Do you see the danger there? And that also takes away from any beautiful, happy emotion. The negative emotions, the hard emotions like sadness, anger, bitterness, resentment, hatred, all that, those are hard to feel, but it still means you're feeling them, which I think is normal depending on what you've been through. Does that make sense? So it's never me saying, don't feel. In fact, I'll be like, oh yeah, great, you felt that. It's what you do in your emotions. Like, I'll be like, I'm totally okay. Yeah, you want to like punch a wall. I kind of don't want you to punch a wall. Maybe we'll punch a punching bag. It's about how you manage those. But if someone says something like, yeah, don't feel that, or my goodness, you felt angry about that, or what, I need you to go, I actually did feel angry about that, and then that's you felt angry about it. And they'll be like, okay, it's just what you do in your anger, what you do in your bitterness, how you navigate through it is what I do, right? Or what is important to manage. But it's okay to feel those. So the numbness is one of the things I work a lot with. I'm like, yeah, I want you to be able to feel. And if it gets triggering, you can control that. Don't be on social media. Like, take some breaks. Don't read those comments. Don't follow that person. I've said those things. But you'll not ever hear me say, get off social media, because there's some benefits to it, like connecting, right? So I say, search for those. Stay away from the news. Watch the news once a week. Turn off notifications. Do you know how many times people will be like, did you hear about this? I'll be like, oh, no. I am a news junkie, so I will most likely have heard about it, but there's some things I don't know that people are like, you don't know this, you're on social media. I go, well, guess what? I turn off notifications. I don't get every text thing. I don't see it pop up. I have to search for it. So the news junkie me, I search for the news, but I don't have notifications. So that's my way of protecting myself. Avoidance. Oh, good point about the numbness. Let me think about that. Not necessarily. If we're talking PTSD, you just went through something disturbing, distressing, horrific. So the avoidance can come in maybe day-to-day things. You can't do things. You don't want to send an email. But numbness, if that's the question, I don't want to say that's connected to avoidance. Numbness is a symptom of trauma. You just need to know that that's a symptom, and how do you manage that? So that's how I would answer it. If you don't, here's a saying with anxiety: if you resist anxiety, it will persist. That's a saying. So what it means is you can't just shove it under the rug. You can't go, oh, I'm not stressed out. That didn't happen. Guess what happens? It builds and builds. That's the avoidance you're talking about. That's not numbness. That just you avoiding what you're really experiencing, or you're avoiding that you're stressed out and literally shove it. I'm going to sweep it under the rug. It's there and it's building. Like, how dust builds. It's building, it's building, it's building. It's like that. I actually need you to like take that dust out, put it in a dustpan and throw it away. That's dealing with it. It's a little more work to clean, right? It's easier to sweep it, but sweep it in a dustpan and throw it away. that will help you manage your anxiety. It won't persist. You know, that dread of like, I can't talk to this person. I'm going to avoid this person at work. Have you ever done that? I've done that. I did that a lot actually when I was in corporate America, going, I don't want to see this person. Let's avoid. It's so stressful. I'm trying to prevent that. I'm not trying for you to be besties with them. Just know either I decide literally that I'm not going to see this person, but I'm not going to avoid them. Like, hi, nice to see you. And then go on, right? You're just going to emotionally prep yourself. You're not going to be friends maybe, but you have to see that person. But going out of the way to avoid and not talk about conflict, that dread is what builds. It wasn't until I saw chocolate that my husband numbness began to crack. You know, a lot of people said that. Yeah. And I know some people on my tour have shared those stories. So I think I'm done with PTSD, which was the biggest thing. I'm trying to think if I listed that. There's also other common factors of like feeling depressed and anxious from that. But I'm going to be at the end of the day, everything, if you manage it well and work hard, like PTSD, you can live a good life, you know? And so I think that's really important. Like there are times I still have flashbacks. To me, it's traumatic of a death or something that happened or something I've seen, or like when you're in a car accident, that's still hard. So even I might have to say, I say to myself, you know what? Why am I downplaying my own trauma too? You know, so I think it's important to first always affirm your own experiences. And that's actually half of it. When you're like, this did happen to me. It sucked. What am I going to do? How am I going to navigate that? All right, let's move on to the next thing. I think it's secondary trauma. Secondary trauma. Okay. Secondary trauma, I just wrote about. I took my water. Okay. This is exactly what it sounds. You're getting traumatized secondhand. Someone telling you something. Maybe it's a good friend, family member, daughter, husband, wife, whatever that is. And then, or you're experiencing it secondhand from the media, very common, social media, very common, and you have a reaction and you have some trauma symptoms. This is actually a growing common thing for people like secondary trauma, for people like in the industry of who've experienced like, sorry, not industry, first responders, California firefighters who see things, people like me who might have to come on in a crisis and I see things, right? Or I hear things, but I'm not directly, that event didn't directly happen to me. 9/11 is where the term really came about. There's people hearing survivors and stories. And so 2521, it's a little controversial because they're like, oh my God, they showed 9/11. So I understand that. But what they did well was they showed a reporter, the main lead, literally going through that secondary trauma because he's hearing story after story from victims' families, some survivors, people who've witnessed what it looked like. I have friends who had to evacuate. You know, I had to hear stories too. So that's secondary trauma. Don't underestimate that though. It's still trauma. So when we say in our field, the big T, we do mean PTSD, that's big. But it doesn't mean we downplay everything else, but the PTSD is the big T. But secondary trauma could be, yeah, you're a family member and you heard about something happening and you feel those symptoms. It could also be numbness, hypervigilance, anxiety, all the things I talked about with PTSD. It's similar. It's just that you heard it secondhand. Social media has become a problem sometimes when they show these graphic videos. I don't know about you, but I don't watch them. And there's been huge tragedies and incidences, even in our own country, not just abroad when we see war, that I don't watch or I can't do my job. In dramas, you see these very graphic things. I'm like this, you know, or like this, because don't forget what you hear also leads to trauma. If you hear something, I mean, it's terrible, some of the things you hear. So I'm like, you know, you can go like this. So it's really, really important to protect your mental health. And be careful what you watch. So 2521, Nam Ji-hyuk's character experiences that as a reporter covering 9/11. And that's part of what happens toward the end of just where he is in his stage of life. So I thought that was actually well done. And then Daily Dose. So Daily Dose of Sunshine, the nurse, Park Bo-young's character, she won an award for excellently done. She had both. She had secondary trauma and also, okay, when I say both, I actually didn't write it in here. There's something called vicarious trauma, where you're faced with the same trauma or same experiences so often that it just becomes part of your life. And then you're constantly living in that trauma. Psychiatric nurse who might see, you know, severe mental illness, people dying of suicide. That's kind of what happened to her patient. That's a spoiler. But yes, she saw that, experienced that. And I thought it showed really well her own secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, more secondary trauma. Hearing, she wasn't there when it happened. She heard about it. She loved that patient. And you see kind of what happens to her. She had to get treated for that. It was not actually a dark drama. It was heavy, but very hopeful. I think that's why it did well. So if you want to see that, I'd recommend that over Squid Game, like hands down. Heavy topics, but it's very educational, really well done. And the main lead shows you her journey of being a wonderful nurse, psychiatric nurse, having to be hospitalized herself, and then navigating through that. I caution saying overcoming, because she has to still navigate through it. And that stigma of being a nurse that went into a psychiatric hospital. You see that also in real life. Definitely. So I thought it was so well done. So that's secondary trauma. Again, you could hear something, and if the minute you feel something, that I'd say, you know what, be careful about all the things you're watching. Social media, love it. But if you see a video pop-ups, slow it down. Do this, do that. It might not even be a natural disaster. It could be someone having a conversation, and it's like horrific to you. Like I see that all the time, just things in the news. Photos, still photos can be very traumatic. So really the boundaries must be in place more than ever, thanks to social media, the benefits we love, but also that, right? It was so helpful to see that depicted in 2020. It really helped me consider what the reporters went through. I am partial to reporters because I was one. And I did used to cover, I feel like I was in the industry short enough that it didn't impact me, and hence now I can give back. But some of what the reporters and journalists go through today, can you imagine when you have to cover school shootings in the US? I'm bringing this up, yes, because I think it's important for us to know, to cover those stories and have those in social media. You're a reporter that has to take those videos and has to post them. Very traumatic. So I want to say that journalists are one of the top people in this world covering stories that have secondary trauma and also vicarious trauma. This is constant trauma going. Someone I know who covers a war-torn, a war zone. They are constantly in that. So I can't imagine, but I can help in my own way. But yeah, as a journalist, I remember having to be like, my boyfriend, who's my husband. Oh, there was no texting. I was texting, calling. Oh yeah, I had to go down to downtown DC, cover shooting. I mean, I didn't see the shooting, but I had to cover it. So I remember things like that, and imagine doing that constantly. And so that is secondary trauma. And I don't want us to underestimate it. Even some of you may be impacted what you just saw with the fires and thinking, oh my goodness, that could happen to me, hypervigilance. So just normalizing it, be aware of it. Don't stay numb. Like if you're like, I feel nothing, I would like you to examine that. It might help for you to talk about it. And then the more you talk about it, emotions do come out. That is the power of sharing. Sometimes just reading a news article versus watching news feeds is less triggering for me. Yeah. I mean, this is me being facetious but I'll see a social media feed of some fun K-drama. You see those things or those feeds, you're like, stop. You got to like stop watching it. A news feed, especially if you click on one thing, this algorithm will show you something else and something else. So be careful of something that you even click on. So news feeds are, I have accounts to all of them, but I don't get any notifications. Sorry, even those on Instagram. They're like, sorry, did you post something? They're like, did you see my post? I'm like, no, because I have to purposely go in, and that's okay. And that's just part of my work, and that's what I do. It involves fewer of the senses. I only have to do it once. Great. So you know what works. Don't underestimate social media, even doom scrolling. Doom scrolling came from a journalist. When you actually doom scroll, meaning you see somebody post something and you think that's it. No, you start reading every comment. You do that. Some of the comments, I do read my comments. They're fun. We're talking about love scouting and stuff. But if you're talking about a news incident or something and people giving their own opinions, even some of the comments I've seen on my threads of going, why did you like that drama? I don't like that. I mean, that's when the doom scrolling gets worse and worse. And you're like 100 comments in, dangerous. When I say dangerous, it's because you'll be like, oh my gosh, they felt this way. How dare they? Or what is this? That's doom scrolling. So minimize that and maybe just read the post. And then the minute you feel something, stop. I'll give you an example. As a parent, when my child was in college during the pandemic, and we were on Facebook. You got to love those Facebook groups for parents. I did love them. It was a way to stay in contact. Connect and contact and connect with all the parents. But when I started doom scrolling, like people's comments to some other parents going, that's not what I would do for my child. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Parents get judgy. I got triggered because I'd be like, oh my God, this is like such a toxic thread. But it started out good. It's like, hey, what would you do about your son moving into this dorm? And then it just became, because we're talking tens of thousands of parents on a college thread, right? On a college Facebook group that became so toxic. That's doom scrolling. So caution. Okay, so that's secondary trauma. Hopefully I'm answering all this. This is so much. Any other questions as I'm going? Please ask me. You can ask me questions. The next one is intergenerational trauma. Mhm. This is trauma that happened in one generation. So, like maybe your grandparents. And then what we see happen is that it impacts subsequent or next generations after that. The intergenerational trauma term came from the Holocaust. So you know the horrific event of the Holocaust. So imagine that and survivors of the Holocaust and their offspring and what they experience. They may never talk about it. In fact, most of the time I'm trying to think, when you think of like the older generation, the aging population, maybe baby boomers or even folks my age, yeah, they may never even talk about the trauma. It's like that elephant in the room. That's the nickname, by the way, of intergenerational trauma. Trauma from experienced by a disturbing, distressing event experienced firsthand by one generation that impacts the following generations. It could be family, it could be community. So I say, and we say this in our field, it's the elephant in the room. Like maybe you know a family member, this happened to them, but we don't talk about it, but you all feel it. And a very common thing is people who had to leave a war-torn country came to a safer place, never talked about it, but their kids know because it's in daily language. Like, oh, when I was a child, you know, you got that as a kid, right? I sometimes still do that. I don't do that as much as my parents did, but when we were kids and we did this, it's funny when you think about it, but that's kind of the innuendo of intergenerational trauma. It does impact the next generation, the third generation, the fourth generation. I've seen it, and it's still a cycle. When we say we're breaking the cycle, people misinterpret that as you're stopping intergenerational trauma. No, the trauma happened. You can't ignore that, but you're breaking the cycle of toxic habits, family patterns, like a family that never talked about what happened and even said, never talk about what happened, because I've seen that in families going, we don't talk about it. And they'll get very like, so that's the rule. And I said, but then you're here. And so what is it you want to talk about? Because you said you never want to talk about it, but somehow it's impacted your grandchild or your cousin and all this stuff, right? So that's my challenge to people. But the whole thing about breaking the cycle of trauma is breaking the patterns. And I think that's what I love about my field, like finding the patterns in families, in stories, in conversations. So I'll be like, oh, you just said that. Did you do that before? Right? Or did you not do that before? That's very important. So look at that. And it's important to know, even in your own family, that elephant in the room, it's difficult. The family dinners of you not talking about something, very common in Asian households, but I've seen it in all. So the K-drama, The Good Bad Mother, I think I shared this before. It was really difficult for me to do this podcast interview because they were like, yeah, that's terrible. The mother is just terrible. And I went, I get it, because it was not good, right? Wonderful actress. And you saw it. And it's very, by the way, who saw Good Bad Mother? Say yes if you saw it. It literally showed, and I wrote it in my book, from the very, very beginning of when the trauma happened. Like I thought it was like that. That's how you see it happening to one generation, the mother, and then the result onto her son. And then what we hope is the way it ended, very hopeful, that the son starts a new family and breaks that cycle, the cycle of behavior that the mother did. Wow, everyone's silent. No one saw Good Bad Mother? I'm just curious. I do highly recommend it. It may be triggering. Actually, it could be triggering. I mean, I watched it and I thought it was brilliantly done. Yes, thank you. I was like, who saw it? But really well done. But yeah, you see something happened to her. And then everything she did from that stemmed to some of the very difficult, kind of mean and harsh things. But I think I talked about this before when they're like, yeah, she was abusive. I go, no, she wasn't. There is a slight difference, and I'm being sarcastic. There's a big difference. There is how you saw it's in the result of the son. Uh, um, Gosh, what's his name? I love him. Lee Do-hyun. I loved his portrayal. How he loved his mother shows you him understanding. He hated it. They had a confrontation when he was a teenager, and I have that used that scene. I've used those scenes even in corporations, going, "Hey, by the way, this is a classic scene. Mom, you're trying to live through me. Stop it. Stop trying to live my life to redo yours." That kind of thing. But then his whole life surrounded about how he understood his mother. So there is a fine difference between that. Does not mean it's good. In fact, that behavior is what I would say break the cycle of intergenerational trauma. Like you don't need to starve your kid to study, things like that. Yes, stop that. Or if you're feeling like you're really worried about your kid, you say, "Yeah, I want you to be a lawyer because I think it'll be good for you." But then you have these conversations of what do you want to do? Or, I sense that you're unhappy. That's breaking the cycle. Okay. But not, completely ignoring the trauma. Does that make sense? What did Nancy said? He became the good, bad son. Ah, interesting. Can you elaborate on that? I would love to know that. By the way, the title in Korean is just bad mother. Napan Amma. Isn't that interesting? And the fact that the English title was You're a Good Bad Mother. Get it? So the Napan Amma I thought was a little, what's the word? Harsher, but very realistic. Again, we understand the parent. We saw on the drama, what happened. But then we would like her to go, this happened, and I'm going to get my own help. That would be ideal. I'm going to have to seek therapy because that was very traumatic, how your father died, and then be like, I know, like I'm doing the same thing to you that my mom did to me. That's kind of what we're trying to do is break the pattern. That does not mean you do it in one day. It's a constant struggle. I still struggle with it. I'll say the same things my mom said to me. I go, did I just say that? Damn, I just said that. So it's really important to go, at least you're aware. I'll be like, okay, what I meant was I did mean you did have to do this, but it's just reframing, understanding that came out harsh, or like even changing your behavior and going, okay, I'll just stop saying that, right? Not easy. She wanted the best. She just didn't know how to get it. Yeah. And then she did something right though, because he was able to break that pattern. It's not just on his own. When people say, yeah, he broke the pattern, no thanks to the mom, I disagree with that. Just like when a kid has problems, I'm not saying I blame the parent because it's not always the parent, but all of that is involved. I look at all those dynamics. So I don't just say, yeah, he did it on his own. No, his mother has something to do with the fact that he did choose to be a lawyer. He did try to avenge what was happening. That was the whole thing, and do his best to create the life that his mom wanted him to live. He lived into it, actually. He actually ended up doing it, right? And then obviously they had their whole own healing process. Some of it was hard to watch, but so well done. The red sleeve, there was some very, very graphic's not the right word, sorry. Very confrontational scenes where the grandfather, who's the king, who says to Juno, the grandson, who's going to be the king, and how, the story, if you're on my tour, we go through that story, right? Where he killed his own son because of mental illness, and he has some trauma from that. So you see him constantly triggered. The grandfather's like, you're out to get me, just like my son. That is an example of that generational trauma where that grandfather was, poor Chuno, right, had to deal with all the behavior of that. And he himself changed, of course, over time. He started and he is in the real life, that king did that, right? He started his own life, tried to break that, understood that, because it was his own dad that was killed by his grandfather, but then he lived a new life and broke that pattern of his own trauma. That doesn't mean he was perfect. He also had to manage that. But I really love those scenes where the grandfather was just going, at one point crazy, and you're like, what's going on? That own trauma of what he did or what he experienced, or also how he became king, which is controversial. He became king because he wasn't part of the royal line, right? And so all of that is part of what we see that Chuno's character, which is what Red Sleeve's about, went through. So I love that. I know this is so best. I'm always like, I love this. It's really good drama. But yeah, you kind of cry at the end. Something in the Rain. That's how I'm going to conclude with this intergenerational trauma. A lot of people talk to me about Something in the Rain. I don't like the mom's portrayal. Good Bad Mother, I like the mom. Red Sleeve, I liked the characters. The grandfather didn't have the biggest role, but a very key role. But Something in the Rain did not like the mom. But what you saw, I have seen in Korean culture, mhm, especially when it comes to marriage and choices and everything, and them being having volatile conversations. Have seen it. I've actually seen that even in non-Korean families too. It just manifests differently. But Something in the Rain, if you didn't see it, Jung Hae-in and Son Ye-jin are the main characters, and they start dating. But Son Ye-jin's character is very interesting. A wannabe strong woman. I'm not saying she's not, but struggling with some of her relationship choices, and her mom that doesn't help. Who's like, you must get married. Here's who you're going to get married to. This is the perfect guy. I'm going to set you up. Maybe you've experienced that. I still see that in real life, in many families actually, and it's hard to watch. You're like, oh my gosh, we're in 2025. This is what's happening. They're like, yep, because the core root of like the Asian cultural is marriage and then producing in the marriage, right? So that's kind of what the Something in the Rain was. But why I say it's generational trauma, it did impact Sonia Jin. She quite couldn't make the best relationship choices, kind of paralyzed. But her mom, which we don't see the grandmother and other generations, you're only going to imagine that the mom also experienced that as well. That's usually what we see, you know? Someone saying Something in the Rain was super influential for me. I have the same mother. Oh, thank you for sharing that and speaking up on that, because people just assume it's Korean. No. Yeah, of course. And it's different things. It could be your mom, grandmother, parent, you just knows where you're questioning, where does this come from? You do know that's the term. So it does exist. We're talking dating back to the Holocaust. This is why I'm always in research. Researchers studying the behavior of these survivors and their family members and going, oh my goodness, we're seeing some interesting, not so good things coming out of the survivors' families because of that trauma. In the womb, it's very important. That's why they say take care of yourself when you're pregnant. Yeah. The stress, it does impact you. I'm kind of digressing on that, but I wanted people to know that the mother was horrifying in Something in the Rain. I brought that up because I think it is something worth talk about. It has helped some people heal. Let me tell you how. Because they see it. They realize they're not alone. It's so triggering, but they're like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing my experience displayed. That's one example of that healing going, okay, now I just realized that's so toxic. And it's not. So some people actually question that in their own life going, well, my mom wants me to get married. It's normal. I'm like, not that kind of behavior. Maybe the wanting of your family member wanting the best for you in a marriage, that's normal, but not the behavior, right? So people would see that. And another thing they actually said, they would see that and actually help them understand. And I even went, how so, right? Because I'm thinking, oh my goodness, how so? I guess seeing that, they just empathize, knowing, wow, the mother just wanted the best. It just came out horrifically. I'm trying to think at the very end when it was I would say, satisfying ending, but you saw the impact on Son Ye-jin's character. In fact, I actually say her character really struggled having those boundaries and then kind of not copping out. What's the best word? Maybe copping out on her own relationship because she couldn't think for herself going, I know this person makes me happy, but then I don't know what I want. Right. And so it was kind of nice to see that ending after a little bit of a break. Irish Catholic moms. Yeah. Oh, thanks for bringing up religion, spirituality. That does matter. Yeah. If you're raised in the church or raised in a certain way, this is the way it is. It's also in my own family. And I also caution repeating the same things, going, yeah, but this is the way it should be. And then I'm like, what? A classic example that I love that I always give is someone said to me, I was so dead set on her daughter not getting her ears pierced. And I was like, okay. And I go, yeah, we're like, no, you're not getting your ears pierced. And the daughter's like, can you tell me why? And I think she was fairly young, maybe like 8 or 9. And then the mom was like, Jeannie, I was like, well, yeah, it's because that's what my mom told me. That's a very little moment. But she just went, I had no good reason except that's what I was told, or that's what I was supposed to do, not get the ears pierced. And so I think she gave her daughter some parameters like, oh, on your 9th birthday or something. But we worked through that. But I was like, that's just a simple example. I went from a very traumatic example of marriage to a simple example of an everyday thing that you repeated and don't know why you repeated it, and went, Does this make sense? She broke the cycle. I think maybe she actually gave her 10th birthday. It was like a couple years. It wasn't like, yes, you will get it done. She's like, no, I want to wait. Let's do 2 years to see if you're able to take care of your ears. I thought it was super cool. And that's just an example. And she just went, that's what was told. And so some people do what they're told. But if it doesn't make sense, you can break that family pattern. And that's not easy, but it's also not hard to be like, this was toxic. I will try to. And then here's the other thing. People go the opposite. So I'm not saying go the opposite. Like, don't go to 2 extremes where you went this way, I don't know, super strict upbringing, and then you gave no rules whatsoever. We've seen what happens. Kids also need boundaries and rules and ground rules. Do you know that even in some of my facilitation calls, I will say, here are the ground rules. Let's begin with that. And sometimes the organizations will have me read their ground rules, like their consent form of like, this is what we will do. This is what we will not do. I actually love it. And sometimes I'll ask going, do you have any ground rules? Because I'm facilitating. This is a tough conversation. They're like, oh, so then I'll just say it going, the minute I see a comment and I don't think it's good, I will comment on it, or I will not call on you. If I see that, I'll say that. You need that, even in a workplace. Same thing. So that's really important to understand that generational trauma, intergenerational trauma is also a term, transgenerational trauma, you've seen those terms, does indeed exist. And that elephant in the room, it's kind of painful. And after years, when you can't meet family members because of the elephant in the room, it gets kind of sad when you could break a cycle in your own family, or you break it in your current family that you want to talk about it. Being like, hey, I know we were taught not to talk about it, but I want to talk about it. I had to let go of saying no when my daughter wanted to get her nose pierced. It's still pierced. I don't see it anymore. She's beautiful. Oh, thank you for sharing that. I think I shared this on social media like 2 years ago when my son, Blonde, he wanted to look like Jimin and or did he want to look like all BTS and dyed his hair like platinum blonde? He learned from that because his hair all fell out. Anyways, that's just a side note. But I was like, no, you can't do that. Doesn't look professional, blah, blah, blah. I was all like this. And I was like, you cannot show up like that in Korea. And, I just was all, and then I went, it's fine. I let that go. Did he show up like that in Korea? Yes, he did. I think it was growing out. Korea's a little more conservative in that sense, even though they're K-pop artists, but you don't see that day to day, right? So I totally understand that, Kim. And then but clearly that's different because his hair fell out. He's like, I'm never dyeing my hair again. And it's not like I don't want him to dye his hair. I just, in that moment, had to let go of him wanting to dye his hair blonde. And I went, why am I so stuck on that, right? Small steps in breaking generational trauma. Yes. I think that's a great way to conclude because I talked forever. It is. At the very end of the day, one small step. Like, you know what? Thank you, daughter, for talking to me about wanting to get your ears pierced. Let me think about it. That one step is breaking a pattern that maybe was like, no, we don't talk about this. This is the way it is. This is the way we've done it. When actually someone goes, this is the way we've always done it at an organization, I went, so did that work? And they're like, no. And then we're all cracking up going, then, so why are you still doing that? Right? So it's harder to make changes. And that's just part of it. Right? It was the same for me with my daughter's tattoos. Yeah. I mean, it's like, we're still moms, right? Or dads or parents or caregivers. We will have our own things. It's also what we're taught, what looks normal, what's supposed to be normal. But I've always said this, you know what? We pick our battles. At the end of the day, you pick your battles. So for something in the rain, maybe that battle is the one you need to pick. For instance, who you're going to marry. You put your foot down. I will choose the person I'm going to marry. Or I need to move away from home. Or I need to have an emotional cutoff. The term of I will emotionally cut off from my family. I might physically see you, and that might mean physically like maybe once a year, but I'm moving out. Or mom, I'm not doing this. Or whatever that looks like, that's breaking the pattern, but it's a small step. It could be a small step or a big step, but even a small step like this, a big step could seem like you're moving out, but sometimes I'm like, that's actually a small step. I'll sometimes say that going, that's a small step. You could move out. You could live on your own and you don't have to do this. And they're like, you're right. It's just the pattern. I've had to, kids living with their parents. My mother had an adult brother die. I don't remember him, but she has never talked about him. Like he didn't exist. I've seen that too. And and if I say elephant in the room and that really is an elephant in the room, like there's an uncomfortableness that could be brought up, and it might, but you don't always have to bring it up, right? that's sensitive there. So I'd be like, it really depends on the situation. But if you sense that's something that a question that could be asked, because it could impact future generations, for instance, hereditary illnesses, mental illness, we always ask, is there a history of it in your family? Because it's also genetic. That could mean that could be something you need to find out for the sake of your kids or grandkids. I let go of the nose piercing with my second daughter, but not my first, and I regret it. Interesting. Thanks for sharing me that. I mean, aren't we looser with by my fourth kid? I'm like, yeah, do whatever you want. I'm kidding. No, for me, it was I had to choose which hills I want. Yeah. I mean, yeah, what battles, what hills, what things you want to let go when there's bigger fish to fry. So that's generational trauma. I had one more thing to say about it. I thought I saw another example of it. If there's another K-drama that you see, just let me know. But those are really good ones. Some of it is not like, you know how we think we see generational trauma, but sometimes I get irritated if I think it's like dramatized. These ones I really thought were good. And then you look at the patterns. I've broken the pattern in many instances with my family, no regrets. No. I have two with my boys specifically. And I feel good about it too. And actually it's only enhanced our marriage and family. So breaking patterns, breaking behavioral patterns is what I do. Is actually very important, but not burying the trauma, meaning it's there. And how you discuss it, that's up to you. And just like Nancy asking a very sensitive question, do you bring it up? Maybe not, unless you feel that, the elephant in the room. I'm just going to go with this. Noonchi. If you feel it and see it constantly, you may want to bring it up. But if it's there and you're like, she seems better off not talking about it. But if you sense a reaction, you'll see it. Mom going, yeah, oh yeah, my brother died. That's kind of that you're like, how did your brother die, Mom? I mean, you could ask a question, follow up. I need you to gauge, and you can gauge. I always say, be an expert in your own gut reaction. Remember, 90% of the serotonin is created in your gut. So that hormone is important. The gut feeling. I always go with it. I'd like to say, so far, my gut hasn't been wrong. It probably is, but you believe it's right because you went with what made sense, right? Hi, Leslie. I tried to talk to my mom about some things that I came to realize were coming from her own life experiences and her generation. She just looked at me and asked if I was blaming her for things. It's hard speaking to the older generation. Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. At the end of the day, I said this before, you cannot change someone's perspective on how they saw something. So your mom saying, are you trying to blame me? You're blaming me for how I raised you. You could just say, no, I'm not. And then, do your best to do that. But when you're trying to bring up something or a disturbing event, again, I need you to think of yourself going, I'm going to bring this up because it's bothered me. Or the way I want to raise my kids, I want to make sure we're open about things. But you're not going to go, we need to bring this up because you are so messed up. Does that make sense? I'm joking about that, but that's what tends to come out. Or you messed me up. And now I'm like this. I need you to change that. Go, yeah, I'm really struggling because every time we talk about uncle, whatever, that's the reaction we get. And I'm so stressed out about it. So, again, and make it about you. I am saying make it about you because these are mental health conversations. You can't control somebody else's reaction. So at the end of the day, this generation also may not change. So there's a lot of times I say, you may take your family to therapy and they may never see it as a trauma. They'll be like, that was not traumatic. Oh yeah, everybody deals with, being shot at. I've heard that. And I went, okay, not really. But I don't downplay that. I don't just go, oh my gosh, you don't see that as trauma. I just go, okay, so that's how you see it, right? So we just have to understand that every generation, particularly the older folks who don't see it that way, that's how they see it. So that's really important. That's the compassion and grace. Noonchi, which means sharp eye, observations, looking, hearing, observing, being, Noonchi, feeling, and your gut. And so that's Noonchi. And so at the end of the day, if you can't Noonchi yourself, that's my saying. If you can't Noonchi yourself, you can't read yourself, you can't read anybody else. So got to know what's going on with you. Then you can go, okay. Like Sonia Jin didn't know quite of the decisions. Is he bad? Is this guy bad? Changin seems so much. What's Changin's? He has such a cute name in there. Is it Chuno? I think his name was Chuno. Whatever it was, he's like, he seems good for me, but I don't know, so that is where I would need you to, that's where we say that, hey, Sun Yejin's character, this is what I want you to do. You have to go with what makes sense. You can break that pattern. It's been toxic, it's unhealthy, things like that I work through, but I won't necessarily blast a mom, even though that one I also didn't like. And that was a character, Thank you. I know. I was like, I want to wrap up by 1 p.m. Eastern. I'm wrapping up. That's it. Other things to come are countdown to Korea has begun in a stressful way because I'm like, oh my God, I have to get things together. We'll be in Korea for the longest time we've ever been. And it's also a very busy spring. So keep me in your thoughts because I think I'll be doing like overnights and tours. It's my job. I'm not going to complain. I love it, but super excited for what's to come. And I want to do this again. So this was trauma is very heavy. Oh, I'm going to end with, let's do this. Who was this character? Do you remember? Oh, but if you guys want some line friends, you should get some because they're really cute. RJ, Jin. It's like based on their characters that they chose or designed. So it's super cute. I'm going to end on this note and show you guys these stickers again. If you need some stickers, put it on anywhere. Sorry, these are down. If you resist anxiety, it will persist. Yes. Bye. Love you guys. I can't wait to see you on my tours, but I'll see you again soon, next week. Thanks for spending Saturday morning with me.